What happens when Hollywood's most beloved action star discovers that a late-night talk show host has been secretly sabotaging his career behind the scenes? Tonight, we're diving deep into the explosive confrontation that left audiences stunned and industry insiders scrambling for answers. This is the untold story of how Dwayne Johnson's appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live turned into a career-defining moment that nobody saw coming. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story will change everything you thought you knew about late-night television. The green room at Jimmy Kimmel Live was unusually tense that evening. Dwayne Johnson sat in his chair, scrolling through his phone with an expression that his closest friends would recognize as barely contained fury. The makeup artist had already finished her work, but The Rock remained motionless. His jaw clenched as he stared at the screen, displaying a series of text messages that had arrived just minutes before his scheduled appearance. "Mr. Johnson, you're on in 5 minutes," the production assistant called out nervously. She had worked on the show for 3 years and had never seen a guest look quite so intimidating in the green room. Dwayne looked up slowly, his trademark smile nowhere to be found. "Tell Jimmy I need to speak with him privately before we go live." "Sir, we're really cutting it close with the timing, and Mr. Kimmel is already on stage doing his monologue." "Then get him off stage." The words came out calm but carried an unmistakable edge that made the assistant take a step backward. Meanwhile, on stage, Jimmy Kimmel was wrapping up his opening monologue with his usual brand of self-deprecating humor. Completely unaware of the storm brewing just behind the curtain, the audience laughed at his jokes about celebrity culture and Hollywood excess, having no idea they were about to witness something far more dramatic than any scripted segment. "We've got a fantastic show tonight," Jimmy announced to the crowd, his voice carrying that familiar late-night host enthusiasm. "Dwayne Johnson is here, and I've got some really interesting questions prepared for him. Some might say they're long overdue." The audience applauded, but backstage, those words landed like a thread in Dwayne's ears. He stood up from his chair, all 6 feet 5 inches of him, and made his way toward the stage entrance. The production crew scrambled to accommodate his request for a pre-show conversation, but Jimmy was already introducing him. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one, the only Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson." The familiar entrance music began playing, and Dwayne found himself with no choice but to walk out onto that stage, carrying with him knowledge that would either destroy his career or expose Jimmy Kimmel for who he really was. As he emerged from behind the curtain, the audience erupted in their usual enthusiastic applause, but Dwayne could barely hear them over the sound of his own heartbeat. Jimmy stood up from behind his desk, arms outstretched in that practiced welcome gesture that had greeted thousands of guests over the years. But as Dwayne approached, Jimmy's smile faltered slightly. There was something different about The Rock tonight, something that made the season host's instincts kick into high alert. "Dwayne, great to see you, buddy," Jimmy said, extending his hand for what should have been a routine handshake. Dwayne looked down at the offered hand, then back up at Jimmy's face. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 seconds. Finally, he took Jimmy's hand, but instead of the brief professional shake the audience expected, he held on, his grip tightening just enough to make Jimmy's eyes widen slightly. "We need to talk, Jimmy," Dwayne said, his voice low enough that the front row could barely hear, but the microphones picked up every word. "Well, that's what we're here for," Jimmy replied, trying to maintain his composure as he gently pulled his hand free. "Let's sit down and chat." As they moved toward their seats, Dwayne noticed how Jimmy positioned himself, angling his body slightly away, creating just a bit more distance than usual. It was a subtle defensive posture that most people wouldn't catch, but Dwayne had spent enough time reading people to recognize the signs of someone preparing for conflict.
"So, Dwayne,"
Jimmy began once they were seated, falling back into his host routine. "You've got a new movie coming out, and I know our audience is excited to hear about it." "Actually, Jimmy, I think we should talk about something else first." Dwayne's interruption cut through Jimmy's practice flow like a knife. "I think we should talk about the conversations you've been having behind closed doors." The audience sensed the shift in energy immediately. This wasn't the usual playful banter they were accustomed to. Jimmy's laugh came out forced and hollow. "I have a lot of conversations behind closed doors, Dwayne. You're going to have to be more specific." "The conversations about me," The ones where you've been working very hard to make sure certain opportunities don't come my way. Jimmy's face went through a series of micro-expressions, confusion, concern, and finally settling on what looked like calculated innocence. I honestly have no idea what you're talking about. Really? Dwayne reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Because I've got some very interesting text messages here that suggest otherwise. The camera operators, sensing that something unscripted and potentially explosive was happening, began adjusting their shots. The director in the control room was frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let this play out. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, his host persona cracking just slightly around the edges. Dwayne, I think maybe there's been some kind of misunderstanding here. A misunderstanding. Dwayne's voice rose just enough for everyone in the studio to hear the edge creeping in. Jimmy, I've been in this business long enough to know the difference between a misunderstanding and a deliberate attempt to sabotage someone's career. The audience was completely silent now. Sensing that they were witnessing something far more real than anything they had expected from a late-night talk show appearance, Jimmy glanced toward the wings, probably looking for some kind of signal from his producers about how to handle this situation. Look, I think we should probably take a commercial break and figure this out privately, Jimmy suggested, reaching for the control that would signal his crew. But Wayne's hand shot out and gently but firmly stopped him. No, Jimmy. I think we should figure this out right here, right now, in front of everyone. After all, that's what you do best, isn't it? Having conversations about people in front of audiences? The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jimmy Zoe's usual confidence was nowhere to be found, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. Jimmy's eyes darted around the studio, looking for any escape route from a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his control. The audience remained frozen in their seats, unsure whether they should be concerned or excited about witnessing what appeared to be a genuine confrontation unfolding in real time. Dwayne, seriously, I think you're overreacting to whatever you think you've heard, Jimmy said, attempting to regain some semblance of control over his own show. Maybe we should just focus on your movie and keep things light. Light. Dwayne's voice carried a dangerous calm that made several people in the front row shift uncomfortably in their seats. Jimmy, there's nothing light about what you've been doing. There's nothing light about the phone calls you've been making to studio executives, telling them that I'm difficult to work with, that I'm unreliable, that I'm not worth the investment. Jimmy's face went pale, but he maintained his defensive posture. That's absolutely ridiculous. I would never say anything like that about you or anyone else. Dwayne held up his phone, the screen glowing in the studio lights. Really? Because I've got a text message here from Marcus Chun at Universal Studios. You remember Marcus, don't you, Jimmy? He's the executive producer who was considering me for that action franchise you really wanted your buddy to get instead. I don't know what you're talking about, Jimmy replied, but his voice had lost its conviction. Marcus sent me this message an hour ago, Dwayne continued, his voice growing stronger as Jimmy's grew weaker. He said, and I quote, just wanted you to know that Jimmy Kimmel called me last week asking if the rumors about your attitude problems on set were true. He seemed really concerned about whether you'd be a good fit for our project. The studio fell into complete silence. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently realizing that anything he said at this point would only make things worse. But that's not all. Dwayne pressed on his momentum building. I've got another message here from Sarah Williams at Disney. Apparently, you had a very interesting conversation with her about how I might not be the right choice for their upcoming superhero film. You told her that I had a reputation for being difficult during negotiations and that they might want to consider other options. Jimmy finally found his voice, though it came out strained and defensive. Dwayne, if I had any conversations like that, they were just honest discussions about the industry. People ask my opinion about actors all the time. Your opinion? Dwayne leaned forward in his chair, his imposing presence making Jimmy instinctively lean back. Jimmy, you're a talk show host. When did you become a casting director? When did you start thinking it was your job to decide who gets what roles in Hollywood? I never said I was deciding anything, Jimmy protested, sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the studio's air conditioning. If people ask me questions, I answer them honestly. Honestly. Dwayne's laugh was cold and humorless. Let's talk about honesty, Jimmy. Let's talk about the conversation you had with Tom Bradley at Netflix 3 months ago. Jimmy's reaction was immediate and telling. His face went from pale to almost gray, and he gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I don't know who Tom Bradley is. Tom Bradley is the head of original content at Netflix, Dwayne explained. For the benefit of the audience who are watching this unfold like spectators at a tennis match. And 3 months ago, he was considering me for a lead role in a major action series, a role that would have been worth about $50 million/3 seasons. Jimmy swallowed hard, the sound audible in the quiet studio. I still don't know what you're getting at. What I'm getting at, Jimmy, is that Tom Bradley called me personally to let me know that you had reached out to him with some very specific concerns about my professionalism. You told him that you had heard from multiple sources that I was becoming increasingly difficult to work with, that I had developed an ego problem, and that Netflix might want to reconsider before committing to such a large project with me. The audience began to murmur among themselves, the implications of what they were hearing starting to sink in. This wasn't just a celebrity feud. This was one person systematically trying to destroy another person's career. Even if I did have conversations with industry people, Jimmy said, his voice barely above a whisper. That doesn't mean I was trying to hurt your career, doesn't it? Dwayne stood up from his chair, his full height making him tower over the seated talk show host. Jimmy, let me ask you something. In all of these conversations you had about me, did you ever mention anything positive? Did you ever tell any of these executives about my work ethic, my professionalism, my track record of delivering successful films? Jimmy remained silent, his eyes fixed on his hands. Or did every single conversation focus on alleged problems, alleged attitude issues, alleged reasons why these studios should think twice before working with me? I might have mentioned some concerns that I had heard, Jimmy admitted quietly. Concerns you had heard from who? Dwayne demanded. Because I've been asking around, Jimmy, and nobody seems to know where these concerns originated. Nobody except you. The studio audience was completely captivated now, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented in late-night television history. This wasn't scripted drama. This was real conflict playing out in front of their eyes. You want to know what I think happened here, Jimmy? Dwayne continued, beginning to pace behind his chair like a prosecutor addressing a jury. I think you got jealous. I think you saw my success, my popularity, my ability to connect with audiences, and it bothered you. I think you decided that if you couldn't have the level of success I was having, you'd do everything in your power to make sure I couldn't have it either. That's not true, Jimmy protested, but his voice lacked any real conviction. Then explain it to me, Dwayne challenged. Explain to me why a talk show host would take it upon himself to contact studio executives and plant seeds of doubt about an actor's professionalism. Explain to me why you would risk your own reputation to damage mine. Jimmy looked around the studio desperately, as if hoping someone would come to his rescue, but his producers and crew members were just as stunned as everyone else. Finally, he looked back at Dwayne with something that might have been resignation in his eyes. Maybe I did express some concerns about you to some people in the industry, he said slowly. But it wasn't because I was jealous. It was because I genuinely believed that your success was going to your head. My success was going to my head, Dwayne repeated, his voice rising for the first time. Jimmy, I've been nothing but professional in every interaction we've ever had. I've been a guest on your show multiple times. I've always been courteous to your staff. I've never given you, or anyone else, any reason to question my professionalism. You changed, Dwayne, Jimmy said, finally looking up and meeting his eyes. You became bigger than the rest of us, and you started acting like it. The words hung in the air like an accusation, and for a moment the two men stared at each other across a divide that seemed to encompass years of hidden resentment and professional jealousy. The silence that followed Jimmy's accusation was deafening. Dwayne stood motionless for several long seconds, processing what he had just heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried a weight that made everyone in the studio lean forward to catch every word. I became bigger than the rest of you, Dwayne repeated slowly, as if testing the words to see how they sounded. Jimmy, let me tell you what actually happened. I worked harder than everyone else. I showed up earlier. I stayed later. I treated every person on every set with respect, regardless of their position. I built my success through dedication and professionalism, not by tearing other people down. Jimmy shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly realizing that his attempt at justification had only made things worse.
I didn't mean it like that.
How did you mean it? Dwayne challenged, his voice beginning to rise. Because it sounds to me like you're saying that because I achieved success, I somehow deserve to have you working behind the scenes to destroy it. That's not what I was doing, Jimmy protested weakly. Then what would you call it? Dwayne demanded. What would you call systematically contacting industry executives to plant doubts about my character and professionalism? What would you call spreading rumors and concerns that apparently only you seem to have heard? What would you call deliberately trying to cost me roles worth tens of millions of dollars? Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but Dwayne held up a hand to stop him. Actually, don't answer that. Let me tell you what I call it. I call it sabotage. I call it professional jealousy taken to a level that's not just unethical, it's pathological. The audience was completely silent now, understanding that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Several people in the front row had pulled out their phones and were recording, despite the show's usual policy against filming. You want to know the really sad part about all of this, Jimmy? Dwayne continued, his anger now fully unleashed. The really sad part is that I actually respected you. I thought you were one of the good guys in this industry. I thought you were someone who built his career on talent and hard work, not on trying to destroy other people's opportunities. Dwayne, please, you're taking this way too seriously. Jimmy tried one last time to deflect, but his voice was shaking now. Taking it too seriously. Dwayne's voice exploded with rage. Jimmy, you cost me a $50 million Netflix deal. You've been systematically undermining my career for months, maybe years. And you think I'm taking it too seriously? I never meant for it to go this far, Jimmy stammered. But it did go this far, didn't it? Dwayne shot back. And the only reason we're having this conversation at all is because people in the industry started coming to me directly instead of just listening to your poison. Jimmy looked around the studio again, his eyes wild with panic. Can we please just cut to commercial?
We can work this out privately.
No, Dwayne said firmly. We're not cutting to commercial. We're not working this out privately. You made the decision to conduct your campaign against me in private conversations with industry executives. Now we're going to have our conversation right here, in front of everyone. Dwayne, please, Jimmy begged, and there was genuine desperation in his voice.
Now.
My career, my reputation, everything I've built. Everything you've built. Dwayne interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. Jimmy, you built your career on the backs of people like me, actors who came on your show, who promoted your ratings, who helped make you successful. And this is how you repay that loyalty? By stabbing us in the back the moment we're not in the room? Jimmy tried to stand up, perhaps thinking he could somehow salvage the situation by ending the interview. But Dwayne's presence was so commanding that he seemed to push Jimmy back down into his chair without even touching him.
Sit down, Jimmy.
We're not finished here. I think we are finished, Jimmy said, trying to muster some authority. This is my show, and I'm ending this interview. Your show? Dwayne laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jimmy, after tonight, I don't think you're going to have a show anymore because everyone in this audience, everyone watching at home, everyone in this industry is going to know exactly what kind of person you really are. Jimmy's face went completely white. You can't do this to me. I'm not doing anything to you, Dwayne replied coldly. You did this to yourself. Every phone call you made, every seed of doubt you planted, every lie you told about my character. You did all of that. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it. Security. Jimmy called out suddenly, his voice cracking with panic. I need security. But the security guards who appeared from the wings didn't move toward Dwayne. Instead, they looked confused, unsure of what they were supposed to do. After all, Dwayne hadn't threatened anyone physically. He had simply exposed the truth. What are you going to have them do, Jimmy? Dwayne asked. Arrest me for telling the truth. Have me removed for exposing your lies. Jimmy looked at the security guards, then back at Dwayne, then out at the audience. Everyone was staring at him with expressions ranging from disappointment to disgust. He had lost control of his own show, his own narrative, his own career, all in the span of a few minutes. I want him off my stage, Jimmy said to the security guards, his voice barely audible. Your stage. Dwayne stepped closer to Jimmy, and, even though he made no threatening gestures, Jimmy instinctively cowered in his chair. Jimmy, after what you've done, after what everyone now knows you've done, this isn't your stage anymore. This isn't your show anymore. This is the place where your career came to an end. The security guards finally moved, but not toward Dwayne. Instead, they positioned themselves between the two men, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation, but recognizing that they needed to de-escalate things before they got even worse. Mr. Johnson, one of the guards said respectfully, maybe it would be best if you left now. Dwayne looked at the guard, then back at Jimmy, who was slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon.
You're right.
I think I've said everything I needed to say. He straightened his jacket and looked out at the audience one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to remember what you witnessed here tonight. This is what happens when jealousy and professional sabotage get exposed for what they really are. This is what happens when someone thinks they can destroy another person's career and get away with it. As Dwayne walked toward the stage exit, Jimmy made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. Dwayne, wait. Maybe we can work something out. Dwayne stopped and turned around slowly. Work something out. Jimmy, the only thing I'm going to work out is making sure that everyone in Hollywood knows exactly what you've been doing. Every studio, executive, every producer, every agent. They're all going to hear about this conversation. They're all going to know that you can't be trusted. You'll destroy me, Jimmy whispered. No, Jimmy, Dwayne replied as he reached the stage exit. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone could see it with that. Dwayne Johnson walked off the stage of Jimmy Kimmel Live for the last time, leaving behind a talk show host whose career would never recover from the revelations that had just been exposed. The audience sat in stunned silence, understanding that they had witnessed something that would change late-night television forever. Jimmy remained in his chair, staring at the empty space where Dwayne had been standing, knowing that his world had just collapsed around him. And there was nothing he could do to put it back together. That's the explosive story of how Dwayne Johnson exposed Jimmy Kimmel's secret campaign of professional sabotage and ended both their relationship and Jimmy's credibility in Hollywood forever. What do you think Jimmy's real motivation was for trying to destroy The Rock's career? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more shocking celebrity stories that reveal the dark side of Hollywood.